Welcome back to Banging the Can, the Houston sports show that does not apologize for championship rings and tings, presented by Bolen Media. I am your host, Ross Bolen, and today we are starting with one of the weirdest stories to ever unfold in Major League Baseball, the Carlos Correa fiasco. Now let me start by saying I have an enormous amount of respect for Carlos Correa. This dude was inarguably the spiritual leader of the Astros during the stretch between our first World Series and our second, minus, of course, the 2022 season when he was in Minnesota. But from 2017 through 2021, he took it upon himself to become the face of the franchise and single-handedly defend the team in the media when everyone piled on to the Astros after the sign-stealing scandal broke. As I have said repeatedly, other fan bases being upset with the Astros was to be expected, but the way the media and Major League Baseball made the Astros scapegoats for what was clearly an issue across the league was incredibly bogus. Carlos knew that, and he defended the squad with class, without directly throwing any other teams or players under the bus, and gave the team a much-needed edge, really cementing the Houston versus everybody attitude that Astros fans and players continued to carry today. Now, that being said, when he had the opportunity to re-sign with the Astros or enter free agency and chase the 10-year contract he and his agent Scott Boras have been focused on securing, there was a lot of confusion in Houston about why the Astros seemingly disrespected Carlos during discussions. Here is a tweet of mine from March when that was unfolding. If they didn't truly bother getting back to Carlos Correa at all, either Astros ownership and management is completely incompetent or something yet to be reported occurred. One party clearly feels disrespected. I think it's pretty clear now that the something yet to be reported was that the Astros, being the organization that would have administered multiple physicals to Carlos Correa during his 7 seasons with the team, clearly knew more about his health than anyone else, fans included, media included. They, like the Giants and now the Mets, were likely not willing to commit a decade-plus worth of money to Los, considering the questions surrounding his long-term ability to stay healthy. It obviously helped that we had Jeremy Pena waiting in the wings, but it's not like our front office knew Pena would pan out the way he did. But I think the question marks surrounding Correa's ability to stay healthy certainly pushed our management in the direction of taking a risk on Jeremy Pena, which clearly panned out. You have to imagine at this point, now that the Giants and Mets have both expressed concerns related to Carlos Correa's physical, which, as I understand it, might largely have to do with the fact that his physical makes a 10-year-plus contract uninsurable, and teams want to be able to buy insurance against that kind of investment. But you have to imagine at this point that Carlos probably wishes he had just remained with the Astros, especially considering how 2022 panned out for our team. And I'm not saying he's going to live the rest of his life filled with regret, but the current situation unfolding for Carlos is a legitimate nightmare. If his deal with the Mets falls apart, like all the way apart, the way that it did with the Giants, and he once again hits the open market, what are the odds that yet another team throws a 10-year, $300 million offer his way? Seems slim, wouldn't you say? Now, maybe there is more information than we know so far, but it seems there are concerns like regarding his leg or ankles or some surgery he had when he was in the minor leagues. There's been a lot of speculation. But he averaged 98 games per season from 2017 to 2019 with thumb, back, and rib injuries. Okay, like his ability to stay healthy was legitimately my main concern when his contract was expiring and the team was considering re-signing him. The Astros were considering re-signing him. And that was before we knew about all this physical shit, right? So do I feel bad for the guy? I mean, Carlos Correa will be fine. Dude has to have like $50 million in the bank at this point. He's only 28 years old. He's still one of the best shortstops in baseball. There's no argument to be had there. He's one of the best players under 30 years old, period. Okay, he's going to get paid by somebody and will continue to have a wonderful career as a professional baseball player. It's just seeming less and less likely that he'll get this massive decade-long contract that he and Scott Boras have been so focused on receiving. And, I mean, is it to answer the question, do I feel bad for him? No. Is it a bit of a bummer? Yes. Do you want to see a guy that has seemingly done everything right throughout the course of his career catch what seems to be a bad break, no pun intended here? No, you don't, right? But, I mean, look, it's in one, from a very, from an angle that I don't like considering, the Astros did handle Carlos Correa and the contract that he wanted and his departure correctly, right? It's just another feather in the cap of our front office to be able to say, yep, we avoided that whole situation, that whole shitstorm, and the guy that we ended up replacing him with, who I believe costs like $700,000 plus last season, obviously Jeremy Pena on a rookie contract, he ended up winning World Series MVP and ALCS MVP. So it's not like, I mean, there's nothing but positives here from the side of the Houston Astros. But as Astros fans, we are all obviously huge Carlos Correa fans, and it is a little bit weird watching him attempt to navigate this situation and get thrown into what has just become a total clusterfuck based on his physical. And I'll say this. It's fun watching Mets fans grapple with the situation, because when their owner stepped out and said he was, going to make this deal and he was so excited about it, Steve Cohen probably spoke a little bit too soon, saying that they needed one more piece and this was the last one. And Cohen is obviously one of these guys. He is the owner in Major League Baseball who does not seem to give a shit about the salary cap or the lack thereof. More specifically, he doesn't seem to care about the tax penalties that come with exceeding certain salary levels. And he's just spending and spending and spending and spending and trying to buy a championship a la New York Yankees in the early 2000s, right? Which people in the sports world largely shit on when the Yankees did that, in part because it worked, but because, in large part, because it throws the baseball world into sort of disarray in terms of like small market teams that don't generate the kind of revenue that large market teams like the Yankees or the Dodgers or even the Astros can generate. They can't compete when it comes to trying to sign these big name A-list free agents that are gonna, demand $300 million from one of only a handful of franchises that can even afford to do that. And it's not that, I guess that's not even the correct wording. It's not that these other franchises can't afford to do that. It's just that traditionally in professional sports in the United States, owners who don't own large market teams typically aren't willing to spend like they are large market teams. And the Mets and Steve Cohen, obviously the Mets having not done a whole lot anytime recently, they had a really good team in 2022, but still fell short, obviously. They're kind of, they're just pressing that issue even further. The buying a championship strategy that Steve Cohen is attempting is something that, by and large, has been seen as a negative in the sports world, in the professional sports world in the United States. And it is going to be interesting. I mean, Carlos Correa deal or not, he's still doing something that is never been done before. Their salary cap is insane. Their spending is crazy comparative to, say, the most recent World Series winning team, the Houston Astros. So how that impacts baseball on the whole for years to come, whether or not they get the Carlos deal done, whether or not, apparently he's not willing to renegotiate and throw in stipulations, surrounding his health and what happens with him longer term into that contract. So we're just going to have to see what happens. But it is fascinating to have a guy like Mets owner Steve Cohen come in and shake up the baseball world the way he is, for better or for worse, and to see how other owners will react, because these guys are all billionaires. If you own a professional sports team in the United States at this point, in the big three, NBA, NFL, or MLB, you're a billionaire. They're billionaires. So they've got the money to spend. It's not like they don't. It's just that a lot of these guys do, in fact, treat their franchises like businesses. They care about revenue and profit. And in the case of Steve Cohen, he does not give a shit. It's not about making money. It's about it being it's like a toy to him, a plaything, and a point of pride almost. He wants to purchase a championship, right? So it just is a totally different way of looking at the game from an ownership perspective. So going to be interesting to see how everyone else in the league reacts. But for now, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with Los, one of the more beloved Houston sports figures in history. A guy that we are all rooting for from afar, I think, but a guy who we kind of understood the skepticism around his health even before the physical stuff came out. And now that it is out, man, things are going to get weird quickly. I could even see a scenario where like the Mets deal falls apart and then Carlos is filing lawsuits against the Mets and Giants for diminishing his value on the open market. I don't know how that all plays out. I don't know how the Major League Baseball Players Association is set up vis-a-vis lawsuits and suing teams, but it's going to be a fascinating scenario to watch unfold. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. If your New Year's goals are to manage your budget better and save money, you need Rocket Money. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, it's a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought just to watch one show on, or that free trial that you never even used that is now kicked in and is charging you money every month. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify your subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones that you don't want. Rocket Money makes canceling subscriptions as easy as the click of a button. Simply find the subscription you don't want and press cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. No more long hold times with customer service or tedious emailing back and forth to make sure that cancellation takes place. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. I cannot tell you how much money I've wasted on unwanted subscriptions over the years. At one point, I realized I'd still been paying an annual Xbox Live subscription for my Xbox, and I had given away that Xbox 4 years prior. That's why Rocket Money exists. Stop throwing your money away. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/BTC. That's rocketmoney.com/BTC. Rocket Money, ROCKETMONEY.com/BTC, as in banging the can. In Texans news, the team strung together their third consecutive competent football game, this time against the Tennessee Titans, in a winning effort that could perhaps fuck the franchise out of the first pick in the draft. The Texans now sit at 2-12-1. We play the Jaguars this Sunday, okay, and the Colts on January 8th to close out the season. And while we have sucked sloppy dong the strong majority of this season, these last few weeks of surprising performances against against the Cowboys and the Chiefs and the Titans are pretty untimely if you were looking to see this team land another number one pick. We've got serious competition in the total crap category, as the NFL is never lacking in embarrassingly shitty teams. The Chicago Bears have 3 wins, the Arizona Cardinals have 4 wins, and the Denver Broncos have 4 wins, and the Indianapolis Colts have 4 wins. So while these last few weeks might have saved Lovie Smith's job for next season, and I pray that it did, because I'm not sure I can handle rotating in yet another incompetent coach, we should probably be rooting for the Texans to lose out for the sake of draft pick positioning. And if you're like, oh, come on, Ross, where's your heart? Where's your pride? Are you fucking kidding me right now, guy? Have you been watching this team the last few years? No reasonable human being could possibly be emotionally invested in the Texans at this point. All reasonable fans should be rooting for the best pick possible so that there's a chance, an off chance even, that this franchise can rebuild in the right direction over the years to come. Because right now, we are essentially dead in the water with perhaps the least talented roster that this team has ever fielded, which, if you've been paying attention to this team since its inception like I have, is really, really saying something. In Texans-related news, Legendary defensive end J.J. Watt has announced his retirement from the National Football League at the end of this season with a Twitter post proclaiming last week was his final home game, of course, playing in Arizona for the Arizona Cardinals. It was his son's first game to be in attendance as well, and that J.J. is hanging it up after this season. Look, J.J. Watt is pretty much the perfect example of how poorly things went the last few years for the Houston Texans, with Bill O'Brien essentially burning the franchise to the ground after Cal McNair handed him the keys to the kingdom. And things got so fucking bad that J.J. Watt, arguably the beating heart of Houston sports in general for the majority of his 10 seasons here, he had to ask for his release from the team, deciding to head to Arizona to play for the Cardinals, where things have obviously not gone super great as they are competing with the Texans for the worst record in the league this season. But JJ provided some of the only good memories that Texans fans have. He's up there with Andre Johnson, Arian Foster, and DeAndre Hopkins as the most electric players we've ever had the pleasure of watching rock the Battle Red. And somehow all of those guys were actually on the team at the exact same time at one point, and yet we did diddly fucking squat with them all on the team at the exact same time, in large part because of Bill O'Brien's incompetence. Now, JJ is a bit over the top and cheesy. He almost doubled as like a motivational speaker during his tenure in the NFL, but he is inarguably one of the best dudes to ever play for the Texans, to ever play in the NFL, and really an all-around model American on paper, right? There have not been very many good things about being a Houston Texans fan over the years. But J.J. Watt was one of the great things about being a Texans fan for several seasons, and was easily the greatest draft pick this team has ever made. He was one of the most dominant defensive players to ever grind on the gridiron, and football will not be the same without him. He may not have served in the military, but all the same, as Texans fans who have so little to cling to over the course of this franchise's existence, JJ, we thank you for your service. Moving on to basketball, I can't not discuss Luka Dončić's how do you say it when it's Luka's historic, unbelievable, never before seen stat line from last night. If you've been living under a rock, I mean, literally, when the game ended, my entire Twitter feed was Luka, 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 every single tweet. It was nuts. Last night, Luka had a franchise record for the Dallas Mavericks, of course. 60 points, 21 rebounds, and 10 assists, including one of the most absurd plays I've ever seen, the tying basket off his intentionally missed free throw to force overtime. And again, this stat line, 60 points, 21 boards, 10 assists, has never been done in NBA history. Wilt Chamberlain never did this. Wilt Chamberlain did everything. And as the cherry on top, the Mavs came back from behind in a way no team has done in over 20 years to beat the New York Knicks 126-121 in overtime. Keep in mind, Luka is 23 years old. He's a kid. 23 years old. He signed a 5-year rookie contract extension with the Mavs on August 9th of last year in 2021. That will keep him with the Mavs through 2027, which is, frankly, if you're a Rockets fan, not fucking great. The kid is a total freak. I mean, with every passing game, he is trending toward being one of the greatest offensive forces basketball has ever seen. I think last night might have actually just solidified that he is one of the greatest offensive forces basketball has ever seen. So the Southwest Division is a fucking nightmare for the foreseeable future. That's what I'm saying. And the Rockets desperately need their young talent to start making developmental leaps, like right the fuck now. Because, listen to this. It's not great. Brace yourself. The Mavericks have Luka. The Grizzlies have Ja. The Pelicans have Zion. And if the Spurs somehow manage to tank their way to the number 1 pick this season and draft Victor Wembanyama, I might set myself on fire. So our guys, we got to have Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., we've got to see Alperen Şengün, Kevin Porter Jr. We've got to see these guys start to take it to the next level. I mean, I would argue Kevin Porter Jr. out of those four is the one who has shown the most development in the last 2 seasons. And if I had to pick one of the four that I would like to see make it, he'd be the least important to me. So I'm not no hate to KPJ. He's awesome. I just I don't think he's the guy that any of us are expecting to be like the future all-star caliber talent that we can build around, right? To make matters even worse, over the weekend, the news broke that if the Philadelphia 76ers can't come to an agreement with James Harden after his contract expires, he would apparently like to return to the Houston Rockets. And if you had to ask yourself, seriously, if you had to ask yourself the question, what is the worst thing that could happen to derail the development of our young core, including Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., and Alperen Şengün, the answer would legitimately be James Harden returning to the Rockets. And if you asked me, are you down for Harden to return? I would still shamefully say yes. Why? I don't even know, man. He's the greatest player the franchise has seen since Hakeem. And if the deal was right and it made sense and he was willing to accept his role as a veteran tasked with continuing the development of the younger players, then somehow, yes, I would want Harden back. Now, it's easy for me to say this because I know he would never accept his role as a veteran tasked with continuing the development of the younger players. So this all feels extremely unlikely to me. I think it's much more likely that he is using this as a bargaining chip to get Philadelphia to commit to him longer term, to get Daryl Morey, who is running the Philadelphia 76ers, to commit to him longer term. But it works as a bargaining chip for him because everyone in the league is aware of Harden's attachment to Houston, right? He loved it there. He's spoken openly about how it wasn't just about basketball for him. He's got family there. He's got friends there. He's got a business there, a restaurant there. And I think he sees it as a place that he could continue his life after his basketball life is over. So it works. If you're Philadelphia, you have to be feeling the heat a little bit, at least, if you are interested indeed to signing him to a longer-term deal. It's not like the guy's not still playing great. I mean, he is. People, I feel like because Philly doesn't really get necessarily the level of national attention that perhaps they should, and they've had stretches where they're playing out of their minds and then they're not, and Embiid is leading the league in scoring. Harden is leading the league this season in assists per game. But you don't really hear about it. And I feel like as a result, people have sort of forgot. It's like there was so much James Harden talk when he was in Houston, especially if you're a Rockets fan, but really on the national level surrounding the NBA. People either bitching about how many free throws he was taking per game or in awe of his stat lines that he was putting up on a regular basis. I mean, there's a reason people, when Luka Dončić started playing out of his mind over the last couple years, we're comparing him to James Harden and to James Harden's game. He's almost like a hybrid of James Harden and Dirk Nowitzki in terms of he's picked up a lot of Dirk moves. The fadeaway, the one-legged fadeaway that you see him pull off on a regular basis is extremely reminiscent of Dirk Nowitzki, obviously. But a lot of his game, Luka's game, is very much modeled after James Harden. And there's a reason that you would model your game after James Harden. He's one of the greatest offensive scoring threats and passers that basketball has ever seen. Now, it's not always been something that's enjoyable for people when he's not on your team, but you can't, numbers don't lie. They don't lie. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. James Harden is very, very, very good. He's a Hall of Fame caliber NBA player. And like I said, there is no better Houston Rocket in history than him other than Hakeem Olajuwon, who brought back-to-back championships to the city. And for most of you listening, you were too young when that happened or not alive when that happened to really appreciate what Hakeem did. Even I was 93, 94. I was 6 years old, 7 years old during that stretch. So I was excited. It was amazing. Hakeem Olajuwon is a legend to me and someone that I will praise for the rest of my life. But I wasn't old enough to fully appreciate what I was watching at that point. Now with Harden, especially after several years of mediocrity and disappointment, and we were making the playoffs every season, but We had all the Yao Ming injuries, the Tracy McGrady injuries, and then Harden was this breath of fresh air that took the league by storm when he was peaking. He was unstoppable. I mean, insane. The step-back jumper, he's one of these guys that has remolded the offensive face of basketball along with Steph Curry and the like. And, I mean, it just, you can't say enough about what James Harden has done on the basketball court. He's unbelievable. Now, the area of concern for him has always been his focus, his willingness to sacrifice, his off-the-court activities, none of which point to, like, him being a guy you want to bring in as a veteran leader of a young developing core, which is, of course, why it is problematic to consider him coming back to Houston at all, as we are doing the first real rebuild that we've done in like 15 years or however long it's been, where we've sunk to the bottom. We're getting top 3 picks over and over and over. We've got another one coming down the barrel if we don't blow it, or, you know, depending on how you're looking at it, I suppose. But I don't think there are many people breathing who would argue that James Harden is the guy you want coming in and developing your young talent. He doesn't strike you as that kind of leader. When he was in Houston, even when he was on fire, even when he was the greatest scorer in the NBA, there was always still the hope that maybe someone else could come in and be the actual spiritual leader of the team, because he didn't seem to have that in him. And that's where Chris Paul came in, right? And until he went down with that injury, it looked like it was going to work. It looked like we were going to take out the Warriors. I think most of us would argue we were going to take out the Warriors and potentially bring Houston's 3rd championship to the city of Houston in the NBA. But it didn't go down that way. It didn't go down that way. Harden got skittish. He traded off Chris Paul, brought in Russell Westbrook. That didn't work. And once that didn't work, you could see he was frustrated. And I think even more so, as it happens to most of us at some point in life, he felt the hands of Father Time strengthening their grip around his neck, right? He noticed he didn't have that many years left. And I think he felt the intense need to go and get a ring. And he went to Philadelphia to try. Well, first he went to Brooklyn to try to do that. Then he went to Philadelphia to try to do that. He's still there. And it, so far it hasn't panned out. I think maybe he's getting past that point of like, I've got to have a ring to be able to prove I was one of the greats, and more to like the point of like, I want to enjoy the rest of my career maybe, if indeed he is considering a return to Houston, if indeed he's not just using this as a bargaining chip. But yeah, I mean, it just doesn't feel likely. It doesn't. That being said, we got an enormous amount of draft picks and rebuilding power out of trading Harden away, so bringing him back once we've gotten a couple of seasons of rebuild and development under the belt with a young squad of ballers around him would be pretty tight. I mean, if you look, we're talking about maybe like a 2-year deal here, right? Where he comes in and we see what he can get done with this squad around him. Tell me that wouldn't be fun. These guys tend to operate, and I'm speaking about Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Şengün. They tend to operate more effectively when they're off the ball. You know who loves having the ball? James Harden. You know who's an incredible passer who's leading the league in assists currently? James Harden. So, it's tempting, but it's very much like a toxic relationship between me and many Rockets fans and James Harden at this point. Like your ex-girlfriend who treated you like shit and cheated on you and left on a bad note. And then a few years later, she comes crawling back wanting another chance. And she's so hot that it's hard to say no. That's James Harden right now if you're a Rockets fan. It's not good. Admittedly, it is toxic. But it is tempting. Right? I tweeted on Christmas when the news of his potential return broke, which I can't even believe Woj dropped this bomb on Christmas. It was like, dude, just let us enjoy our time with our families, you fucking dick. Every Houston basketball fan is talking about this on Christmas Day. And I tweeted, I'm basically Tobias Funke on Arrested Development, talking myself into James Harden's return to the Houston Rockets, where Lindsay says, well, did Harden work for the Nets and Sixers? And Tobias says, no, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might. But it might work for us. That's how I feel at this point with James Harden and a potential return to Houston. In closing, beloved sportswear catalog Eastbay, a mainstay of my childhood and millions of kids who grew up in the 90s playing sports, will be discontinued after December. It will no longer exist in 2023. A beloved name in sporting goods will be no more. Eastbay, a company whose male catalog became a favorite of sports fans across the country, will reportedly cease operations in 2023, according to Wisconsin, according to Wisconsin Public Radio. 210 workers will be laid off as part of the closure in Wausau, Wisconsin, the same town where the company was founded in 1980. First of all, it's shocking to me that Eastbay employs 210 people. Good Lord, how many people did it take to slap photos of shoes into a catalog? The story continues from ESPN. Evolving from a small regional venture into a nationwide powerhouse, Eastbay began selling its own line of clothing in 1990. The company offered jerseys, jackets, and other paraphernalia in team colors, as well as an array of sneakers from Nike, Adidas, Converse, and other companies. If you didn't grow up with Eastbay, I seriously looked forward to the Eastbay catalog coming in the mail. I'm still not sure if we had to subscribe to it, if it just showed up, or how that worked, but they had all the newest sneakers and cleats and baseball bats and gloves, and man, they had everything. I think I may have purchased one pair of Allen Iverson shoes, I think they were called The Answer, or The Question. No, The Question. He was the answer. The Question, right? I think. Yeah, but I treated that thing, Eastbay, like holy scripture, which frankly, it speaks to the miracle of Eastbay lasting as long as it did, that I loved it as much as I did, and I've heard this same take from so many people over the last 24 hours, but I can only remember ever buying one thing from Eastbay, yet I seriously, it was like a pivotal part of my sports childhood. There was something about the aesthetic of Eastbay that was undeniable. It was like sports kid crack cocaine in catalog form. If you played baseball or basketball or football growing up in the 90s, you knew and you loved Eastbay. And ironically, much of the foot fire they displayed in their catalog when I was growing up is now highly sought after grails of the sneakerhead community today, because fashion operates on a 30-year cycle, and the 90s are hot again somehow. I'm getting old. Every episode of Banging the Can is available on youtube.com/@bangingthecan. Appreciate all of y'all who are watching on there. Of course, we are available on all audio platforms as well. It would mean a lot to me if you would continue to share the show with friends and family this holiday season. If you're, spending New Year's with the family, or you end up on the phone with your uncle talking about the Texans and how much they suck, tell them about Banging the Can. Tell them about the show. Send them a link to our YouTube, or, if your little cousin is a huge Astros fan, send them a link to our TikTok or whatever. Just share the show with your Houston sports people moving into 2023. This is the most unapologetic Houston sports show in existence, and will continue to be just that rolling into the new year. Check out my media startup, Bolen Media, at bolenmedia.com. My comedy show, the Ross Bolen Podcast, available wherever you get Banging the Can. And follow us on TikTok at Banging the Can, as well as Twitter and Instagram at Banging the Can. I am Ross Bolen. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WRBolen, Bolen. I will be back soon. Until next time, H-Town, stay down.